Welcome to this special chapter by chapter exploration of broken beginnings, the true story of survival, silence, violence, and the long road out of darkness. In this series, we step beyond the pages and into the mind of the man who lived it, a boy raised in the chaos of Mutendere, a young soul navigating brutality inside his own home, a witness to trauma, loss, and the mysteries that shaped his earliest memories. Today, we begin at the very beginning, Chapter 1, the birth of a life marked by confusion, danger, and a world that demanded strength long before childhood had a chance to exist. Terence, before we dive into the details of the chapter itself, I want to start with the emotional truth of it all. When you look back at your earliest memories, the atmosphere in that house, the energy, the confusion, what rises to the surface first? What is the first thing your mind forces you to confront?
Uh, yeah, that's where do I start? If I'm being honest with you, it's it leaves me asking myself, how not just myself, but my siblings also, how we could have been brought into that sort of environment. Uh, so yeah, my mind forces me to face the fact that I was made, or rather forced, to understand my environment, and yet I didn't know what it was I was trying to understand. If you get my point. So you see, my dad was a smoker, a heavy smoker. He used to smoke weed, cannabis, uh, which is known as chamba in my native language. Uh, and weed is supposed to be a downer, and not a booster. Um, but for my dad, he turned into a different character, very erratic, very unpredictable, very violent. Um, and yeah, so for me, it wasn't an environment to bring out any children and expect them, in the outer life to turn out to be individuals that'll be, grounded. Uh, because this is why I look at it. So you see, as a child, not just myself growing up, any child, when they're at a very, excuse me, very impressionable age, it's of great importance that you expose them to the right things, you know, which will inevitably mold them, to be uh, a good person, in society. And that's not excusing anyone uh, that's been raised in a bad environment like like we were, for them going ahead and doing wrong. But through my journey, we'll delve into that later on. I can strongly say uh, it definitely had a massive, massive effect on me, you know, definitely not in a good way, in a very bad way, So, yeah. So, yeah, that's what I like to say. Yeah. So, basically, in answer to your question, yeah, it just forces me to realize with a very heavy heart that I should have never been brought up in that environment, you know, walking on eggshells on a daily basis, you know, it was never pleasant. it was never pleasant. It was the worst time uh, in my life, looking back, and that's for sure. And I say that with so much conviction.
Your answer was incredibly powerful. The way you described growing up in that kind of environment, the chaos, the tension, the constant alertness, it hits hard. It's emotional, and honestly, it's heartbreaking hearing what you had to carry as a child. You mentioned something that really stood out. You said you had to read people's moods just to survive the drama around you. That's not something any child should ever have to do. Can you talk more about that? What did reading people's moods actually mean for you day to day? How did it shape the way you moved, behaved, or even protected yourself in that environment?
Yeah, so again, um, when I say, having to read people's minds, it was more so uh, my dad, you know, away from, the villains on the streets and, the madness of the environment that we grew up in, this particular one, when I say it was more so to do with, it was more so to do with my dad, when I say um, I had to read people's mind because, again, like I said earlier, it was because of his habits, because of the smoke and the rest of it, and being this individual that was unpredictable. Personally, I won't speak for my siblings. I'll leave that to them. But for me, I had to read his mood and work out whether he was in a good mood, whether I could speak to him. And 9 times out of 10, you'd find, he would turn up and it took you a few minutes uh, to know that he was in a bad mood, you know. It'd just be the way he will respond if he was asked anything. Not that we ever got in a conversation with him anyway, So every time he would turn up, we'd all just scatter, you know. Most of the time, end up in the kitchen, spend time with mom, you know. He would turn up and he had a workspace where he'd go sit in there, smoke his lungs out, um, have his bath, and then come back indoors. But he would always be on his own in the living room. We never spent time with him. I don't remember having a solid 10 minutes conversation with my dad because of the fear that he instilled in all of us. So that's what I mean. When I say I had to read people's moods, and that was a very difficult thing to do as a child. Where you don't know what this individual is going to do. You don't know whether you're going to receive a slap. You don't know whether something is going to be thrown at you. You're going to be, verbally abused. He was just the unknown, and it was that fear, of not knowing what was coming, yeah, it was never a good feeling, I wouldn't, and you know what, from that, I swore that, if I have kids, I'm gonna make sure that they have a relationship with me, and know what line not to cross, but always be comfortable and free to have a conversation with me. That's what it's about, isn't it? You're building memories and stuff like that. And your kids. The most important thing is you're meant to be having that relationship and building with them. And but unfortunately, I never had that. We never had that. So yeah.
Terence, thank you so much for bringing us into your world. As I mentioned right at the beginning of this interview, there's a lot more I'll be asking you based strictly on the chapters of your book. Now, for anyone watching, you've written a total of 12 chapters, and we'll be going through them one by one. But to avoid spoiling the story for future readers, you won't be diving too deep into each chapter, just little snippets, little windows into the experiences behind them. We've already touched on chapter 1, and you've given a powerful introduction to the book as a whole. But before we continue moving forward, I want to pause here. This book is dedicated to your sister Priscilla. What made you dedicate Broken Beginnings to her? What was the reason behind that decision?
this one came naturally. Uh, it was almost like a way of remembering her and what she must have gone through also. And of course, the biggest thing is, which is in the book, I don't really want to spoil it, to do with the health. There's a very sad, it's a very sad chapter when I talk about, her illness and how she, again, I gotta be a bit careful here. Let me just say, to do with that illness, there's a chapter in the book. I'm not really gonna go deep into it. As you said earlier, it's we don't want a situation where it kind of spoils it for the reader, knowing, all right, this is how this is gonna end, sort of thing. It's like someone telling you about a movie, or you probably come across certain people, you're watching a movie and they're trying to tell you what the ending is going to be, or they even go as far as telling you what the ending is going to be, and then it just spoils it for you. At that point you sort of lose interest. So all I can say is, for me, I had to, with everything my sister went through, it was a no-brainer, I'll put it that way, that this book had to be dedicated to her. And she was someone that I loved dearly, even at my young age. She showed me so much love. I always felt safe around her, amongst all the chaos and the confusion. Every time I was around her, she just gave me that security, that almost reassurance without having to say, because I was, fairly young to understand everything that was going on in our household. But just being in her presence, there's something it did to me. I actually have a scar on my hand, which is always a reminder. Every time I look at the scar, it takes me back to my sister. Again, there's a story in there's a chapter that talks about this, but this scar, how I got this scar, I was actually with my sister when it happened, and so there's a lot of things mentioned about my sister, and so it was, even before I put pen to paper, I'd come up with that decision that for sure this was a book that I was going to dedicate to my beautiful sister Priscilla.
Thank you for sharing that, Terence. Truly. It's clear that this dedication comes from a deep personal place, not just as a writer, but as a brother. The way you speak about her, the love, the pain, the respect, it really adds another layer to this story. And for the viewers watching, I think it's important to understand that Broken Beginnings isn't just a memoir, it's also a tribute. A way of honoring someone whose journey shaped yours in ways most people will never fully see. Thank you for opening up about that. Now, Terence, so let's move into chapter 2. This chapter takes us into Mutendere, the neighborhood you grew up in, the place that shaped so much of your early reality. For viewers who might not be familiar with Mutendere, can you paint the picture for us? What kind of neighborhood was it? What was the environment like? The energy, the people, the atmosphere? Just give us a glimpse into what Mutendere meant to you.
Yeah, so Mutendere, that's in the heart of Lusaka, which is the capital city of Zambia. Is where I grew up, and where all the madness happened. So I got some good memories, and I got some bad memories too. But yeah, he was excuse me, and I believe still is, a rundown area, At the time growing up, it's probably one of the worst neighborhoods in my city. You know, um, yeah, it was almost embarrassing to say you came from this area. You know, and the fact that growing up, I went to well, we all went to schools away from the neighborhood, which were pretty decent schools. Um, so these schools we had, kids coming from affluent areas, you know, and that was always a nightmare for me. Every time I was asked where I lived, you know, I'd have to lie. There was a neighboring area called Helen Kaunda, uh, which wasn't so bad, because they had electricity, they had indoor toilets, they had indoor bathrooms. So it was kind of okay to say that's where you came from, Dare say you came from Mutendere, everyone would be, you know, sort of shocked. So I remember uh, one particular uh, incident where a friend of mine came around to visit. He insisted. He was like, "Look, I need to come and see you." But anyway, finally, the day came, and at that point, I was like, "Man," it was that realization, like, "Oh God, what did I actually do?" And he was brought by a driver, and when he turned up, his face, even the driver's face, was almost like disbelief, like, "No way, you have a friend that lives here?" Yeah, so it was shocking, that's another story, there's sort of another chapter that covers that bit, and what I had to endure, just living in that neighborhood. But yeah, it was an area filled with crime, you had the killers, the robbers, career criminals. We were in bed with these people. They were right there. They were next door. You go past them. These are the people that are causing mayhem. You know, and yeah, not a great place to grow up, to be honest. But like I say, good memories and bad memories. But to a certain degree, I'd say the bad outweighs the good, sort of thing. But yeah, that's just to give you a little insight of what Mutendere is, and like I said, the name is Dark City, because it's just pure darkness, darkness. Me and my guys, if you were meeting up late at night, we had a way, excuse me, that we whistled, that was like our code, so you whistled a certain way, and if your guy was within close proximity, or within proximity rather, he'll whistle back pretty much the same. Looking back, that was funny, man. So that's how you knew, my guys around the area, you know what I mean? And you carried on whistling until you met up, because it was just pitch black, no street lights, nothing. Like I said, there's only one house that had electricity in the whole neighborhood for a very, very long time. I'm talking to the time I was about 16, if that, So yeah, that was the Dark City, Tendera compound. So yeah, that's pretty much it, really.
Terence, thank you for giving us that window into Mutendera, the roots, the reality, and the world that shaped your earliest steps. For everyone watching, this brings us to the end of episode 1 in our journey through broken beginnings. But trust me, this is only the surface. The deeper we go, the darker it gets, and the more you'll understand the man behind the story. We've covered chapter 2 today, but in the next episode, we move into chapter 3. And that's where the layers start to peel back. The choices, the pressure, the shadows, the moments that changed everything. So make sure you like, subscribe, and share this episode. Turn on notifications. Because the next chapter drops Sunday, the 7th of December at 6 p.m., and what's coming? You're not ready for it. Terence, as we wrap up today's episode, is there any final message or thought you want to leave with the viewers before we continue this journey?
Yes, of course, definitely. Um, I like to say thank you so much for everybody that locked in. Um, I know time is of the essence. You could have been doing anything else, but you took your time uh, to listen to you know my story or this section of it. There's more to come, so really appreciate you. For those that have liked, for those that have subscribed, uh, I really appreciate your time. I couldn't thank you enough. And one thing I like to say is, I'm sure, you know, there might be people that will relate to this story, not having experienced the same thing that I experienced, but similar circumstances, maybe an abusive household, a broken family, and the rest of it, So I hope you know that, you're not the only one, um, and that you got to keep fighting and be strong, you know. I heard a saying that says, greatness comes at a price, and the currency is pain, paid up front, So through the trials and tribulations and everything else that we go through that we may perceive as, hardships, like myself, it's just God, for those that believe in God. I believe in God strongly. Just trying to put us through the fire test, the acid test, so we can be a betterment of what we were yesterday. So, yes, again, thank you so much. And to anyone who has a story to tell, remember this: don't die with the music still inside of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Terence. And thank you for sharing those last words with the viewers. To everyone watching, we appreciate you for staying with us on this journey. Your support means more than you know. We look forward to having you back with us next Sunday as we dive into Chapter 3 and possibly Chapter 4 as this story continues to unfold. Make sure you like, subscribe, and share this episode so others can follow this journey too. Until then, thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next chapter.